I want to start with a quote by Otto Sharma, who is the founder of the Presencing Institute. And he says, "The quality of results achieved by any system is a function of the quality of awareness that people in these systems operate from. In 3 words, form follows consciousness." And I start with this quote as a way to say thank you to Rodine for putting together such a powerful gathering for consciousness forming. Our consciousness is only as good as the conversations, the perspectives, the experiences that we are exposed to. And we also gather so that we can solve problems together. And so thank you to Fiona Rogers, the sponsors, the keynotes, the panelists and the moderators who with such clarity and intention have guided us through the important conversations on leadership, social justice and environmental awareness today. And so 3 things struck me as critical for mindsets during this time that we find ourselves in. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka asked the question, is COVID-19 a crisis or an opportunity? And with that question, she reminded us that how we frame an experience matters. It can either expand or limit our possibilities. And it strikes me that perhaps this moment of COVID-19, of social justice conversations, of interrogations about how we are in relationship with our environment, is a moment about thinking of what is possible because of these difficulties, these complexities versus possible despite them. And if we take on this powerful frame that these moments of seeming darkness actually give us an opportunity to dance with our own radical creativity, with our own gifts and talents in terms of how we respond to the gaps that are exposed during this moment, that we can in fact be even better at creating the world that we deserve. The second mindset that struck me is that of interconnectedness, is this idea that perhaps what will take us forward is an embracing of the idea of power with versus power over. In the very masculine energy that the world has taken on over the past centuries, decades, we focused a lot on this idea of power over, of conquering, of colonizing, of being in competition. But I do think that we are being called into a dance with femininity, which is the idea of being with the energy of having power with, of building deepened and empathetic relationships in which we can see not only the needs that we have, but the needs of others. I loved what Ellen Johnson Sirleaf talked about when she said that our hope is grounded in us, to whom the world belongs. And I will add to that, that we also belong to the world. And so this interconnectedness is not just only about our human relationships, but also about the dance that we do with nature. And finally, courageous commitment as a mindset really did stand out for me. Almost every speaker spoke about taking daily steps, adopting creative thinking, being committed to becoming an expert, having resilience, reinvention, and all of these things remind us that in any historical moment, there's always something that is wanting to be born, and that if we're not courageous to be in conversation with what that is, we may miss an opportunity of our own creative possibilities in terms of creating the world that we deserve. And so as we consider a way forward, the following stood out for me as areas that we could focus on. The first is commitment to action. Mama Graça Machel said so powerfully, it is only in action that leadership qualities are revealed. And so we should not take for granted, especially as young women, and as everybody who is really on this platform today, that we have permission to take up space in the world and to be committed to the actions that will create the difference. Number 2 is this idea of not being afraid to radically redefine the things that we have previously called effective and acceptable in our world. our education systems, our working environments, our institutions of power, and in fact, our overall ways of being. I love the conversation on social justice in education. And one of the questions I grapple with as a leadership practitioner is, why do good people become bad leaders? And really, we find the answer in the consciousness forming, what has been available to people in their childhoods, in their formative years, that allow them to adopt the practices and the ways of being that make them a whole and holistic people in the world. The third area of focus that seems to me important is seeing nature as our mentor, as the great teacher that can remind us of both the simplicity and complexity of sustainability. The Biomimicry Institute reminds us that we as human beings are the youngest species on the planet. And so we have so much to learn from those elements that have been around longer than us. And it seems to me that nature is the greatest teacher. The fourth element is doing social justice, both with radical intention, but also with kindness. Sterling Tolle says we must not only heal the suffering caused by oppression, but also the oppression that can be caused by suffering. And so as we take on voices of consciousness, as we are being in the world with some of these difficult conversations, let us remember that many of our social realities were born out of prior movements who may not have considered the how beyond the what. And so even as we fight for the dignities that we deserve, let us always remember the dignities of even those we consider former oppressors or enemies, so that we can create sustainable solutions. And so to conclude, I was reminded as we were speaking today that about a year ago, I gave a commencement address at an elite boys' school in South Africa. And I started by saying that a curious thing is happening in Southern Africa, which is that baobab trees are dying. And at the time, I wasn't aware, and in fact, environmentalists are still not aware as to why baobab trees are dying at such a large scale in Southern Africa. But I was reminded, I was conscientized rather in a conversation I was witnessing between a medical doctor and an African spiritual traditionalist, who was saying that we must remember that baobab trees are matriarchal trees, and often they mirror some of the disconnects in the society that we live in. And as we consider conversations of social justice, of gender-based violence, even the inequalities that have been exposed by the hardships of our times, let us remember that we are always called to be evolving with the times, to be in relationship and conversation with the times with such courage that we can really start to say, what are we being shown? And as we are being shown, what are we being asked? And so I'll end with a quote by Deepak Chopra, in which he says, our attention energizes and our intention transforms. And so let us always be aware of what we are paying attention to. And let us always be aware of where we place our intention, because those very two things will ultimately energize the world as we experience it, and will create the possibilities in terms of transformation that are available to us. Thank you.